Hello everyone, welcome to Data Empires. In the Advanced Data Recovery training, we have discussed different problems and their solutions of logical failure, electrical failure, mechanical failure, and basic firmware failure of hard disk in detail. We discussed some critical problems and their native solutions, which could only be solved with the help of advanced data recovery tools. In new modules of data recovery training, we will discuss the data recovery procedure, with the help of advanced firmware repairing tools and machines. In this training session, we will discuss in detail the hard disk firmware, advanced tools and the requirements of the advanced tools. Friends, as we know that, today data means the world to us just because data is everything in the present scenario. Generally, human error, power outage, natural causes, machine failure, logical errors, physical damage, electrical failures and firmware failure are the main reasons for the data loss. We have already discussed about the logical, electrical, mechanical, and basic firmware failure recovery in the advanced data recovery modules. In this advanced firmware repairing training, we will discuss different hardware firmware repairing tools, and their work process. Also, different firmware problems, their identification, and their solutions through advanced tools will be discussed here. Let us first discuss firmware in brief. Firmware is a program which is hard-coded on the hard disk, and it contains many small modules and subprograms. It has the basic operational programming of the hard disk. Firmware contains the low-level controls of the hard disk. The firmware also controls the physical components of the hard disk, and also decide when and how these physical component works. The problem of firmware corruption is very common in modern hard disks. When the firmware of the hard disk gets corrupted, then without repairing it, data cannot be extracted. When the firmware of the hard disk gets damaged, then the hard disk is partially detected, or wrongly detected, or it shows busy, or shows 0 GB size, or it does not get started. Sometimes a clicking sound comes from the hard disk, which is understood by technicians as a mechanical problem, but it can also be generated due to firmware failure. At this time, finding out the exact reason for firmware failure, and retrieving the client's data by fixing it can be very difficult for any technician. As we discussed in the previous session, the firmware of the hard disk is divided into two parts. One part is stored on the hard disk PCB, and the second part is stored on the service area of the hard disk platter. A very small but a very important part of the hard disk firmware is stored on the ROM IC, or the main processor on the PCB of the hard disk. A big part of the firmware of the hard disk is stored on special tracks on the platter, which is called as service area. Also, the platter of the hard disk is divided into two parts. First is a data area, and second is the service area. The maximum area of the platter is used for the data area. This is used to store the user data. Users can directly access this area and perform read and write operations. A small area of the platter is used for the service area. All the important firmware modules like zone table, overlay, defect table, translator modules, and system files are stored in the service area. Firmware module available on the service area cannot be directly accessed. To access, update, and repair the firmware available in the service area, we require special software and hardware firmware repairing tools. There are many free and paid software available, which can access and repair the basic level firmware problems. Sediv, WD Marvel, Seagate firmware repair, WDR, SRT, and SHRT are examples. By using these software tools, we can solve the firmware-related problems of older series and some of the new series hard disks. Now let us discuss that what are advanced firmware tools and why are they required. As we know that the problems of old and new series hard disk can be solved with the help of software tools. But what about new generation hard drives? There are many hard disks manufacturing companies worldwide. But Seagate, WD, Samsung, Toshiba and Hitachi are the most popular among them. Presently, hard disk manufacturing companies are making higher capacity hard disks. They are making more new hard disks with upgraded performance and technology. They are also upgrading firmware resources and making hard disk more secure and reliable. Therefore, there are more firmware-related problems, but the tools and resources to solve them are limited. To solve the latest firmware issues and data recovery cases, we also require the latest and upgraded firmware repairing tools. Advanced tools provide different backup methods for hard disk firmware resources like ROM, translator, and module. They also provide the latest facilities and solutions to solve major firmware problems. Many companies and their advanced hardware products are available for hard disk firmware repairing. These include PC3000 Ace Lab, Dolphin Data Lab, MRT Tools, DeepSpa and Atolla, which are very popular. In this advanced firmware repairing training course, we will learn recovery through the MRT data recovery tool. We will also try to demonstrate other hardware tools. We will discuss important points and mistakes, which are to be kept in mind while opening the data recovery lab. We will also learn step by step that, how to diagnose the drive easily, and how to recover the data from the drives which have password protection, firmware issue, damaged head and logical issues.